All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome Planning Commission members, staff, and guests. Multiple staff members are here today to ensure that the meeting runs smoothly and all applicants and members of the public are able to participate in the meeting at the appropriate times.
If you are here today and would like to speak about a case, please provide your name clearly into the microphone, and please be sure to sign in either at the back of the room or at the podium for documentation purposes. If you're here today to speak about a case, you must speak up when the chairperson calls for public comment. And I'll go ahead and call the roll. Mr. Causey?
Here.
Mr. Cohn?
Here.
Mr. Cook? Here. Ms. Davis?
Here.
Mr. Harp?
Here.
Mr. Holcomb? Ms. Marshall?
Here.
And Mr. Osorio.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Full house today. I'll give a brief overview of the meeting format. Applicants with requests before the Planning Commission are allotted a presentation time of 10 minutes. This time should include, but is not limited to, an overview of the project, case history, and any pertinent meetings held regarding the request. The time also includes all persons presenting information on behalf of the applicant, such as attorneys, engineers, and architects. This time does not include any questions asked by the Planning Commission or staff regarding request. During the public comment period, members of the general public are given the opportunity to address their concerns in intervals of 2 minutes. After the public comment period, applicants have 5 minutes to respond. The administrator has a timer and will make presenters aware of when their time has expired. The Planning Commission reserves the right to amend these procedures on a case-by-case basis. And then, are there any changes to the agenda?
There have not been any changes since publication.
So we'll go over the consent agenda. The Planning Commission uses the consent agenda to approve non-controversial or routine matters by a single motion and vote. Examples of such items include the approval of site plans, annexations, and street names. If a member of the Planning Commission or the general public wants to discuss an item on the consent agenda, you must speak up after the consent agenda is read. Then that item is removed from the consent agenda and considered during the meeting. The Planning Commission then approves the remaining consent agenda items. Will staff please read the consent agenda?
Certainly. The first item is to approve the July 18th, 2024 meeting minutes. And then under future land use amendment and zoning amendment for pending annexation, case number 2, Annex-2024-0017, 1425 and 1430 Laburnum Drive, request recommendation on the assignment of the land use classification of urban core residential small lot, UCR1, and the assignment of zoning of residential single-family small lot district, RSF3, for a pending annexation. The property is currently classified as mixed residential high density and zoned R4 by Richland County. Case number 3, Annex-2024-0018, 713 Percival Road, request recommendation on the assignment of the land use classification of Urban Edge Mixed Residential UEMR and the assignment of zoning of Residential Mixed District RM1 for a pending annexation. The property is currently classified as mixed residential high density and zoned R2 by Richland County. And case 4 is Annex-2024-0019, 2318 Newell Road, request recommendation on the assignment of the land use classification of Urban Edge Residential Large Lot, UER2, and the assignment of zoning of Residential Single Family Large Lot District, RSF1, for a pending annexation. The property is currently classified as neighborhood medium density and zoned R3 by Richland County. And then we'll just pause and see if anybody's here for those cases.
Is there anyone here from the public who would like to speak on any of the annexation cases in the agenda? Any commission members?
Mr. Chair, if no one on commission is going to pull any cases, I'm going to recuse myself from the consent agenda
Okay.
for voting.
And we've still got some to read. I just wanted to pause after the annexations, but there's several more items. The next one under major site plan review, S-Plan-2024-0008, 1320 Washington Street, 1300 to 1334 Sumter, 1305 to 1313 Lady. This is request for major site plan approval for new construction of a 100,000 square foot office building and parking structure for Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union. And I just want to acknowledge for the record that we did receive one letter that was forwarded to all of you yesterday. And that's the only major site plan on the consent agenda. And then we've got some more cases to read after that.
Is there anyone here from the public that has a comment and would like to speak about the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union property? All right.
So moving on, we have under major subdivision preliminary plat review, case number 6, S-Plat-2024-0025, 23.55 acres on Backspin Drive. Request to amend a previously approved preliminary plat to add 11 single-family residential lots in the Northwood Villas Phase C, formerly known as Eastwood Villas Phase C. The property is zoned PD, Planned Development in Wood Creek Farms. Case number 7, S-Plat-2024-0062, approximately 36.5 acres east of Eclipse Lane. Request preliminary plat approval for the construction of a 186-lot, single-family residential subdivision, Ellington Phase 4. The properties are zoned PD in the planned development for Wood Creek Farms. And case number 8 is S-Plat-2024-0067, approximately 11.4 acres on the 100 block of Bolter Lane. Request preliminary plat approval for the construction of a 45-lot, single-family residential subdivision, The Mill at Wood Creek Farms, Phase 3. The properties are zoned PD, Planned Development in Wood Creek Farms. And I'd like to acknowledge for the record that there was a general comment received via email yesterday, which was forwarded to the planning commissioners. It wasn't regarding a specific case, but about Wood Creek Farms in general. So just to acknowledge you did receive that.
Thank you. Is there anyone here from the public who would like to speak about any of the preliminary plat reviews? Any commission members that did not receive the letter or have any questions or comments? Okay.
All right, moving along. The last item on the consent agenda is case number 9, TA-2024-0005. This is a text amendment for 207 Watery Avenue. Request recommendation on an amendment to the Unified Development Ordinance, Chapter 17, Appendix B, Type 2 landmarks to establish the property as a City of Columbia landmark.
And lastly, is there anyone here who would like to speak about the text amendment for Watery Avenue? Any commission members? Okay. Is there anyone from the Planning Commission or the public that would like any item removed from the consent agenda for discussion? Seeing none, we can consider a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the July 18th, 2024 minutes and the items on the consent agenda.
We have a motion. Can I get a second? Second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. Consent agenda passes. A little rusty today.
Okay, the next case, this is for the regular agenda, a zoning map amendment. This is ZMA-2024-0010 at 513 South Saluda Avenue. Request recommendation to rezone the property from Employment Campus, EC in the Airport Safety Overlay District to mixed residential RM2 in the Airport Safety Overlay District. So this is the aerial photograph of the property. You guys are, I'm sure, familiar with this area. I guess on the next page. Yeah, there you go, is the future land use. This is UCR small lot, UCR1. And this is one of those cases, you've seen some of these before recently in the same area, but basically in order to do residential development in the airport safety overlay district, it has to be a residential zoning district, so that is the request, and staff is recommending approval. Do y'all have any questions for staff?
I remember seeing the others have come up over the last few months, or a few. Any commission members with questions? Is the applicant present? I guess the city, is there anyone from the public that wants to speak for or against? Okay. Any discussion from commission members? All right, I'm not trying to invite a challenge here, but seeing none, I'll take a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to approve the zoning map amendment ZMA 2024-0010 at 513 South Saluda.
Got a motion. Any discussion? Get a second.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Guess we're on to other business.
Yes, and we do have some exciting other business this evening. So tonight, we've got a couple of items. First is the Reaching Riverbanks Community Mobility Plan, and the consultant, oh, you want to do an introduction? Yeah, go ahead.
No, go for it.
I was just going to introduce Kevin Bacon from Tool Design, who's been working on this plan for the Central Midlands Council of Government and with the city and the county as partners. So come on up and take it away.
Good afternoon. My name is Kevin Bacon. I'm the Director of Urban Design for the Southern Region with Tool Design. I always like to stop for a pause. If you wanted to make a joke about my name, not who you're expecting, let's go ahead and do it. Appreciate y'all having me this afternoon. I'm an Atlanta guy. Actually spent 6 years with the Department of City Planning in Atlanta managing some of these meetings, and y'all move a lot quicker than we do. Way to go. I'll keep it brief today. It's a big plan that we've put together. We've enjoyed working with the City of Columbia as well as Richland County and the COG to develop this. COG was the one that was the primary sponsor and lead on the plan. We've been working on it for just a little over 12 months right now, including a week-long design charrette that we did at the end of February with the community members. We were located at the Dutch Square Mall and had pop-ups throughout the study area that really drove a lot of the thinking behind the plan and the recommendations that we came up with. And we presented back to the public last night, got a very good reception on that. And so now we get to move on to the part where we talk to you all as well as Richland County and start making sure you all are aware of what the plan says and recommends. So thank you for this opportunity this afternoon. Next, I got a clicker. It's just like mine, all right. A little bit about the plan. So it's a big study area, and I will reference that a lot of times tonight because in my not super long career, but fairly long, it's one of the bigger ones. And so you have to kind of, really think about what the recommendations are. Are you setting a vision? How far into the weeds do you really go at this point to provide something that's helpful and productive? The study area is the peninsula between the Broad River and the Saluda River, going all the way up to the interstates, and then a little piece in the Earlwood neighborhood as you're just coming across the Broad River. So all in all, about 2,900 acres. That's a pretty good chunk of territory there. And really an opportunity to investigate kind of what is that relationship to the rivers. That was a big theme of the project. The plan started with the COG kind of proposing that one, there's some anticipated change from the area, concerns over the Crossroads project really daylighting this area for the first time, and usually that stirs up developers, and so how do we get ahead with transportation and land use recommendations for this area before people come a-calling. So kudos to that forward thinking and having an opportunity to think about, how do we use plans to shape the growth that we want rather than just react to it. In addition to the COG, Columbia and Richland County, our team also had Bay Area Economics, BAE, as the market consultant, and then we had PEQ, Inga Kennedy, as our community outreach and engagement support. Like I said, the process was about 12 months or so. We started about this time last year with the internal kickoff, data collection, analysis, doing our own homework, and bringing some of the conclusions to the charrette because that wrapped up around the holidays. We floated into the new year to make sure we cleared the holidays before trying to tap the time of community members. So that happened again last of February, very beginning of March. Great session, and then that fueled our work over the summer and taking everything that we heard to craft the plan's vision and goals directly out of the themes that we heard from the engagement, as well as really digging in and developing the plan's detailed recommendations and collaborations with the county and the city and the COG. And then that brought us to the fall of drafting the plan itself and sharing it with community members like we did last night. Some of the big findings that we found that fueled those recommendations, one is obviously it's located between two rivers, but not a whole lot of relationship with it in terms of the peninsula. That's changing on the sides outside of the peninsula, obviously with the Saluda Riverwalk and the Riverfront Park, but inside that area, there really is no connection, and that was also a big theme that we heard with residents and community members of how do we have better internal access for that? And this becoming a community mobility plan, that gets us thinking of, how does that build that network for local mobility that we'll talk about here? Since it's a big site, very complex patterns of development. It's easy to drive down Broad River Road and say it's all strip commercial, but once you kind of peel back that layer and go a parcel or two deeper, you have single family residential neighborhoods, you have multifamily residential, you have office complexes, you have higher education campuses in there. So, there's no one way to say this is what the land use is and here's how we solve for it. So thinking flexibly about what those recommendations would need to be. It's developed that way because it was big corridor driven. Big roads give you big chunky land uses was the way we said it last night. So, how we think about getting recommendations of how we start to break that up is not an easy or simple thing that happens overnight. We've stressed that this is a long-term vision. Previous plans that we looked at, including the 2010 Broad River Road Master Plan, originally sponsored by the COG. Lots of great ideas, but not a lot of movement on that plan. So asking, why that didn't happen and understanding when you're kind of going all in on big corridor recommendations, those require a lot of resources, a lot of momentum for those to actually happen. And if the market's not there, it's not ready for that change, then yeah, the plans have a hard time getting that same momentum. So how do we learn from that and look for different ways in our recommendations to move forward? Another challenge is that the study area is mostly in the city of Columbia, about 60%, but it's also 40% in Richland County. So collaboration will be a big thing in terms of any implementation of the plan. And again, it's a big study area, really big. Here it is again on the map at 2,900 acres, and just for comparison, if you put that same boundary over Lower Manhattan fits within that study area boundary with room to spare. So we're talking about a lot of potential development, a lot of potential infrastructure, and again, this is not a plan that happens overnight. This was a community mobility plan that wanted to reconcile land use recommendations with transportation. So part of that is understanding the web of future land use classifications that is tangled between the city and county. There are 17 districts between the two, and making sense of what do those really want to see happen right now, and how do we make sense of that in terms of what we anticipate for development was a big thing to understand. Between that, unsurprisingly, those land uses straddle that spectrum of places where we like the character of what we have now, we like the development of what we have now, and we want to protect that. And other areas where we're like, change needs to happen here, we'd like to see some higher density, those are typically along the corridors. And there was a lot of alignment between the city and the county, which is a good thing. Again, the existing street network, big corridors that really are the primary organizer of the development in the site. Broad River Road and Greystone Boulevard, Bush River Road, Arrowwood Road, those bigger ones that provide that network through the area. But those are really designed more for pass-through trips. They're getting people to Big Point A and Big Point B across the region. They don't really address the everyday local mobility needs of the neighborhoods within that study area. So if you're needing to make a trip from Elm Abode over to the Food Lion or anywhere else in the site, your trip is going to start or stop or include at some point one of those big roads. So getting around is not necessarily an easy thing for the everyday resident. And just some photos to qualify what you were seeing in the maps. On the right-hand side, you've got those big roads, and they look like the big corridors that you see just about anywhere where you have those designed. And the complexity is on the left-hand side, where you see some of those development patterns, gated apartment communities that and retail development that you usually see along those corridors. But then you start to see some of that finer grain development that we like to see that's maybe a little more urban and becomes more urban the closer you get to downtown. So it's a lot to reconcile. And then again, how do we tie all of this back about a demand of understanding the relationships to the river, having access to that, as well as other really great natural assets within the site? Some scenes from the community charrette at Dutch Square Mall. Had the big maps out there, had really great attendance through our major public activities and people dropping by all week long, which is exactly the point of that, and having them look at what we're drawing and respond to that in real time. And this was the vision that resulted, having a distinct community that created places and spaces for residents and visitors, celebrating and connecting to the natural beauty of the site and having safe, reliable transportation options for all people. The goals that follow that, making everyone feel welcomed, celebrated, and comfortable, celebrating the area's natural beauty, foster, showcasing, and attracting business and new development, and the biggest one for a community mobility plan, creating safe, accessible, and comfortable multimodal facilities. And each of those have kind of their own sub-goals or specific policies below that. To accomplish that, the plan's built on what we call 4 framework layers of thinking about how we reorganize the site physically. First is the river access layer, and I'll talk more about what that is in a minute, but that really looks at those park and green space opportunities within the study area. Right now, they're in that peninsula area. There are no public park facilities within that. There is Marshall Park over in Earlwood, and then you start to get into Riverfront Park. But that was another big goal of the study, was where are those opportunities? And then those become the means by which we start thinking about those non-vehicular, could be trail connections or greenway connections that get you to these park spaces, they get you to the river, but then they provide that local mobility option that's not always requiring you to drive on the main corridors all the time. The next one is the street connections layer. There are some opportunities for new streets, not big streets, but again, in the spirit of local mobility, looking at those gaps and connections between the neighborhoods, that if you are driving or need to drive, how do you have opportunities for those? The growth strategy, really pulling out of the different future land use classifications and clearly articulating where new growth should be focused versus those areas that we're conserving. And then opportunity sites, lots of conversations about Dutch Square Mall and what happens there next, obviously, but there are other big properties out there that we don't know what will happen, but want to make sure we're thinking ahead in terms of how those could facilitate local connectivity and different ways it might do that, so that when you're looking at proposed developments, proposed plans in the near future, that there's more than one way to match the outcomes that we'd like to see for the plan without really having to stay strict on any one solution. So it's a big plan. We've made a large plot version of this available, so you can really get in and see the blue icons on that will be the different park opportunities. The pink ones are the different opportunity sites. When you get into the green lines, those are the river access framework connecting the park opportunities and to the rivers. And the orange ones would be your dash streets. Jumping ahead to the implementation plan, all of those have been coded, understanding like who would be the lead agency to take on those, what are the potential costs of that, and the range of facilities that could be accommodated. It's probably a little bit hard to read on the screen, but you can zoom in on it, and there's a bigger version of that available. For the park opportunities, we've detailed those out on different site features. Again, understanding that conservation of the natural assets of the site is important. I won't go through all of them, but they are in the flavor of where do we have riverfront access right now, even though we haven't formalized it, or where there are opportunities to do that, so let's leverage those. There are places that are stormwater management now, but being passive space that isn't used, and we've seen in a lot of communities those being repurposed to not just be a utilitarian function, but can be part of green spaces and park spaces all in their own right. So those are an opportunity. Utility easements offer great connections for trails. You've done many of those here. There are a few more of those in this site. And even understanding that Riverbank Zoo, as much as that is a regional and national draw, there's an everyday use to that people, what we've found, are doing now to access the river or other destinations, but just getting there is difficult. You have to drive all of the time. So how can we improve the connectivity to that? Similar that we have different park types, we also know that we have different greenway types. I think a lot of people always hear the term greenway and assume it's that shared use path in its own right of way that kind of meanders along the riverfront. We take a more expansive approach to that, and that those naturalized greenways are one of them, but they can also be urban trails that streets that are redesigned or adapted can also do that job. So we're using all of those types, from side paths on streets to protected bicycle lanes, down to some areas where it may just be wider sidewalks. It depends on the specific context in the community in which that green line is crossing. So we've thought about those, and we've worked with the city to make sure that it aligns with the terminology and the standards and the engineering standards. The street connections, I talked a little bit about the neighborhood links. This was an example between Riverside Forest and Elm Abode. Some places there are paper right-of-way sections that just don't have the street in it yet, and these would not be wide streets. We're not talking about recreating Broad River Road, but we're talking about those same neighborhood streets and providing those critical links to facilitate access. Other ones are those big opportunity site connections where it's not just a neighborhood to neighborhood, but it's really stitching back large areas within the study area to help that local connectivity. The growth area, so we've kind of abstracted the future land use into two classifications. It's either for growth or it's either for protection. The areas in gold follow those future land use classifications that really focus on places we'd like to see change and where we might accommodate a certain level of density, and those tend to be along the corridors, versus the green areas, which tend to be the neighborhoods and areas set back from those corridors or along the river, where it's not to say they wouldn't receive any growth or change, but it would be on a very, very minimal, modest scale in keeping with the character and form of those areas. This slide just kind of shows where we've gone through all of the future land use categories, aligned the city with the county, and show how they fit within this framework. Lastly, the opportunity sites we looked at, Dutch Square Mall, that's the obvious one. Greystone North and South, we broke those into two separate ones with all of the auto dealerships we usually see on those big corridors, especially with auto dealerships. At some point their moment comes, and thinking about what the future could be for those next. So as those develop, we don't say what those uses should be at this point, but as it does, what are those connections that the places like that could provide as you're looking at those projects. Other ones, Earlwood Hub around the planned Comet facility, depending on the fate of or the outcome of that potential hub, there is an opportunity to put more people living next to it to take advantage of the transit. So we have some ideas of, connections that could facilitate people getting to that facility if that comes into fruition. And then the Browning Center, which is a business center that's active and mostly working right now, it's kind of an interesting place right there by the interchange, that it may have a future of maybe reintegrating with the neighborhood or becoming something different. So we took a look at that one as well. And each of those, as you go into the full plan, has 2-3 different options of how those could be configured to support local mobility. The implementation strategy, we talked about the 2010 plan that really went all in on the big corridors. This one we're saying start small. There's a lot of small projects in here between the different greenway links, the park and green space opportunities that are much more achievable at the outset than jumping right in and tackling a major corridor. And we're saying let's group those into different areas and focus on moving those forward. They bring a lot of things in from Walk Bike Columbia and other plans that already have momentum, and it kind of helps give them something to add up to. As those goes, you can evaluate your future land use to make sure it's syncing up where you want it to go. As you create those links, as you start to get the ridership because of new growth in that area, then that's an opportunity to reevaluate the transit. And then your big opportunities, your Dutch Square malls or your Broad River roads, those can happen as you've built momentum, or if the market charges ahead in that area, those can come online, but they don't have to come first, is what we're saying in the prioritization of the projects. So you can see how we've broken them in different areas, and they're really about the big connection opportunity that all of those provide. So for example, in the northeast quadrant, those connections really are about getting folks in those neighborhoods over to Broad River. On the central side, it's how do you bridge between the two rivers. As you get to the Earlwood area, it's really between Broad River and those connections to downtown. So just another way to kind of, I think we said last night, break that elephant into smaller bite-sized pieces. The plan should be posted on the COGS website any minute now, and a link can provide it as soon as we have that available. You'll see the plan set up very similar to how we talked about it this afternoon. The first section really talks way more in depth than we did today about the place and understanding how it came to be and what those challenges are. 2 really goes into the engagement themes and how that drove the vision and goals. The plan itself has the bigger version of that map, as well as all of the details about the components of it. And the implementation strategy, if you really want to get into it, that's where you're going to find your project list for each of those connections that we're showing, with planning level cost estimates, potential partnerships, and even some of the options for some of those connections. And that is the plan that we've put together. Appreciate your time and attention this afternoon, and happy to take any questions or comments. Comments are always best. So
I appreciate the presentation and was sitting here trying not to think of a joke, but
you can always email it later, no problem.
yeah, no, this is great. I appreciate the work y'all put into it, and kind of excited to see it all come to fruition, and city and the county work together on that.
Thank you. It was fun collaborating with everybody. Really enjoyed it. And I think we'll be back again several times over the next month for various presentations. But obviously, we're hoping something comes very soon on the heels of this that we can really dig into it and help everybody execute.
Is there an anticipated timeline on starting?
There is not.
Question.
You wanna take that question?
So the reason that Kevin's speaking tonight is because he was in town, but we will be bringing it back to y'all for recommendation for approval. And I think probably only a couple of you have been here when we've taken a plan through this process recently, because it's been a while. But generally with an area plan, we'll do this as an addendum to the comprehensive plan. So it becomes a city policy document so that we can provide those comments to y'all, like when you see your rezoning case summaries, that sort of thing. So that helps guide some of those more incremental decisions as you make those, as council makes those. So you would make that recommendation. We're thinking probably in November. Kevin is speaking to council subcommittee in October, and then it would go to council for public hearing, first reading and second reading. And then once it's a city policy, A lot of the recommendations are transportation-based, so some of those would be more like funding. We know we have a lot of DOT streets in the area. We have a lot of, it's a COG plan, so they might add it to their long-range transportation plan to help move some of those recommendations along. But some of the things that you guys do, talking about those connectivities between communities, when we're looking at subdivision reviews and we talk about where folks can connect, that's a similar concept to what the UDO recommends as well. So does that, I wouldn't say like expect next week there to be, 20 greenways. Those take time, but I think it helps us on the front end when we adopt that as a policy guide. That helps us kind of provide those formative comments as we go through these individual processes and individual applications. Yeah.
Quick question. I was looking at that map where the little icons dropped where they had river access, et cetera. One, I noticed there was no river access where it seems like everybody, I don't know if it's illegal, they're trespassing or what, but for years people have used that little frontage road right there by Riverbank Zoo. It seems like my days of parking and trespassing are over, but I know we used to do that in college. I mean, is there any consideration given to that, considering it seems to be a natural spot people are wanting? I mean, we want people to use the rivers. They're using it there. It didn't see anything on there. I'm just curious if that came across.
I thought we had one on there that we snuck around the western side of the zoo trying to find kind of a, maybe not the exact pathway people were talking about. We did hear about that, but finding where they already had circulation that didn't necessarily require going through their secure controlled areas for visitor access where that could be. And that's really a springboard for having that conversation with the zoo. Okay. Yeah, no, that was a big one. It's if there's anything that we learned in our time here is how proud everybody is of that zoo and what a great place it is. And it's just more like, how do you make that an everyday asset and not just a special destination? Yeah. All right, thank you all very much. Appreciate your time.
All right, great stuff. So moving right along, we have more planning to talk about tonight. I think most of you guys are familiar with the downtown strategic plan that we've been working on. Our consultant is not here tonight, so it's just going to be me, but I'll be brief. So anyway, as you know, we kicked off this process in February. We're working with MKSK and their subconsultants, White and Smith, and on a two-part process. The first part is a strategic plan for downtown Columbia, because the current plans that we have in place are quite old. And the second part of that is to develop a new set of design guidelines for the geographic areas that are currently City Center and Inta so for urban design review. So basically, I've got a couple of slides here. This is the timeline. We're probably a little bit past halfway through the process. We have a draft of the plan now. There was a lot of public outreach, and we have a couple of slides about that. In April, some of y'all were involved in that. We had some stakeholder roundtables, the survey I hope that you all saw. And so the consultants took everything that they heard and they came up with some big themes that they heard and then came up with what they're calling the 6 big ideas. So that's what the plan is basically talking about, and we'll kind of briefly walk through each one of those in a minute. But this is basically, and I would just also want you to know, some of y'all may have already been on the project website. I know we've sent links with the Columbia Compass emails and also with the Walk by Columbia emails. But if you go to the project webpage and really want to dig into these PDFs, you can like open them up individually, zoom in, read all the details. So there's a lot of information here. There's also a little YouTube video that the consultant did when we had our August 1st meetings, which were really fun, interactive meetings where they got to present these ideas to the public and had people provide feedback on the ideas that came out of that. But anyway, we had over 717 survey responses, a lot of folks participating in the roundtables, staff hosted several mobile workshops around town to try to get, just people's ideas about what they want to see and what's important to them downtown. So just to highlight a couple of things, the consultants had come up with 10 sort of I guess, features or things that, like, what makes a great downtown street, and just had a ranking exercise. And it was interesting, the very first top thing that they heard were street trees providing cooling shade for pedestrians. And that was number one of all the things that people really want to see on downtown streets. And then also what they talked about, they were trying to get a feel for where are places that you take people when they come visit you, or what do you think are the most iconic and memorable and cool places downtown? Not a whole lot of surprises here, but we've got so many different great places in downtown that are different. Obviously the State House grounds, and then there's Main Street and the Vista, the USC campus and the Horseshoe, and then the riverfront. So what they kept hearing from people was that downtown doesn't have one identity. There's a lot of different identities there, and that's okay. And it can have a lot of identities, but what we really need is the connectivity, because that's really what's missing. So those ideas are going to be folding into the big ideas that you're going to see here in a minute. They also had some interactive mapping exercises where they asked people where they feel comfortable and enjoy walking, and also places where they don't feel comfortable or feel unsafe walking. And so that also helped to inform some of these recommendations. So basically the feedback and the big ideas, this is kind of just an overview of a lot of the themes that came out of the public input process, and then how those translated into the 6 big ideas. So the first big idea is what they're calling highlight. And this is kind of, in a way, it's assembling a lot of the different ideas into one kind of concept. And the idea here is to actually create 2 loops, an urban trail, if you will, downtown. And so one of them they're calling the Capitol Loop, and it goes up Lincoln and comes down Main. And then there's the Vista Loop, which they have shown on Gervais and Green Street, and they overlap. And basically it isn't a designed project, but it's just a concept of trying to connect a lot of these destinations that people already visit downtown, but making sure that there's a safe and comfortable way to get from place to place. And it focuses on crossings of intersections, and again, providing those trees. And they provided some really neat examples from other cities, like the Cultural Trail in Indianapolis. I've not been there, but it seems like a really neat example to look at. So that was one of the big ideas. And then this also shows kind of the alignment on the map, and certainly encourage you to look at these a little bit further. The second idea is, again, had to do with hearing a lot about the need for shade and tree cover. And it was basically just refresh. And so create comfortable streets and public spaces that welcome visitors and support everyday living. And we heard this throughout all of the sessions that we went to, whether we on USC campus, the real estate development, the residents. I mean, everybody just talked about, we all know how hot it gets here in the summertime. And if we want people to walk places, shade is really, really important. And it also has a ton of other benefits. Planting trees improves property value. It supports retail and restaurant business performance, obviously outdoor dining, things like that. Makes it cooler. It actually reduces traffic speed because trees act as traffic calming measures. Reduces air pollution and absorbs stormwater, on and on. There's a lot of benefits. But so that planting more trees and putting those in our right of way as much as possible is certainly part of the recommendations of the plan. The third idea is connect. This is pretty straightforward. It's basically just, again, talking about how difficult it is to connect some of the great places downtown because of how unsafe some of the streets and intersections are. They pointed out, and they got some information from the DOT, there were 7,575 vehicular incidents in downtown between 2017 and 2021. And over half of these occurred on 3 state routes, UG, Assembly, and Gervais. So again, not surprising, although the numbers actually were kind of surprising, I thought. But this is a heat map that shows where those incidents happen. And so this recommendation really just has to do with zooming in on some of those locations and doing short-term safety improvements, which would include things like high visibility crosswalks, like leading pedestrian intervals at signals, potentially doing bump outs to make that crossing distance shorter, pedestrian refuges and wider streets so that people have a place to safely stop if they don't make it all the way. So things like that. The fourth idea is reclaim. And this is something that is really remarkable in a way. It's talking about, and we all know this, but how wide our streets are in Columbia. The right-of-ways are very, very heavily weighted towards cars, lots of lanes, wide lanes, lots of on-street parking, but not a whole lot of sidewalk space for the most part. And that folds into, not a whole lot of street trees and other things. So they did some really interesting research and studies, and this next chart shows a lot of the streets downtown, and the blue boxes show how many, the average daily travel of those roads. Like, for example, on Sumter Street, 4.6 to 6.9 thousand cars a day. That's a pretty low volume. Sumter Street's design accommodates 36.8 thousand cars. So it's, and Sumter Street is also a catalyst project in the Walk by Columbia plan because it is so much wider than it needs to be for the traffic that it has. So this concept, this idea was basically about reallocating space to, multimodal, wider sidewalks, more outdoor dining, trees, bike lanes, and just kind of zooming or just trying to decrease in some ways the pavement that we're using for cars. And that also helps with traffic calming. It's not just the number of lanes, but it's also the width of the lanes. We have measured lanes, like on Taylor Street, there's some lanes that are 16 to 20 feet wide. And freeways have 12-foot wide lanes, so that's just excessive. And that encourages people to speed through downtown. So that was another interesting bit of research that they did that folds into these ideas. Oh, yeah, please. Most of them are. Most of them are. I think there's definitely more than half of the roads generally downtown in the city are DOT owned and maintained. There are also some city-owned roads that have, a similar configuration, but most of the bigger ones, because they are the arterials, are DOT roads, like Sumter and Gervais and UG and Assembly and Bull Street and Elmwood. Yes, Blossom, all of those are DOT roads. The DOT has been, in some ways really also talking about road diets being important ways to calm traffic and slow people down downtown, recognizing that, downtown getting from A to B fast is not necessarily the goal. There's a lot of other things that need to be considered. So as long as we can accommodate the volume of traffic, it doesn't necessarily need to go as fast as it's going when we're on our multimodal streets. So there's just a lot of opportunity here to make better spaces, with our streets downtown. So it's kind of exciting, to really have this kind of with some data attached to it. Things we all know, but to really have it outlined like this with the numbers is pretty fascinating.
The next, like a loaded question behind that is, as the plan gets adopted, what's the process for actually narrowing roadways and then putting that back into the right of way for the sidewalks and making them larger?
It depends. It could be a number of different things. Assuming that this plan does get adopted and move forward, they'll probably, the feedback that we're getting now, from mobile workshops, from the public, from you, from city council, will probably fold into, I imagine that these ideas will still be part of the plan, but they might be prioritized. They'll have some more specific recommendations about how to go about this, like what would be step one, or who might be partners in this. And then basically, whenever, there's lots of different funding sources, a lot of like the reclaim, that's largely, it could be a bigger infrastructure project. Let's just use Sumter Street as an example, because that's one we talk about a lot, because it, was in the Walk by Columbia plan recognized as a street that has great connectivity north-south, all the way from Cottontown, through downtown, through campus, to the south of downtown, way more volume than it needs for traffic. And the recommendation from Walk by Columbia was actually to keep the on-street parking, road diet the number of traffic lanes, and add cycle tracks, which are physically protected by bicycle lanes. And that would be a fantastic, project that this plan would also support. So it could happen a number of different ways. Always funding, of course, is a question mark and how that would happen. But frankly, there is a lot of federal transportation money out there now. So, I mean, some of these things might actually be feasible in the future. So but it's helpful to be able to zoom in on certain streets, because a lot of the streets, I mean, almost all the streets are wider than they need to be, so you have to start somewhere. So this kind of helps to zoom in on what might make sense first. And so that's a good segue into the next one, is really talking about champions. And again, this is just looking at the fact that, there's a lot of big ideas here. This is the capital city. There's a lot of major entities and agencies that need to be partners with the city in a lot of these efforts. The city can't do everything alone. So partnering with, the university or the state of South Carolina to make some of these happen. And then also just nonprofit partners getting buy-in from people. I mean, that's part of the important thing about planning processes, is that it includes all the input that is a shared vision moving forward, so that when something gets, moved forward, that it has that public buy-in and support.
Lucinda, I have a question.
Yes.
There seems to be a lot of emphasis on creating bike and cycle trails or lanes in Columbia, but what I don't see is anything driving people to utilize those lanes or creating businesses or activities that might attract that audience. So is there anything in the plan about that anywhere?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that attracts businesses to, I didn't hear the last part of it.
To attract the audience of people who might be cyclists or bike riders or whatever, to actually utilize that mode of transportation as opposed to a car?
That's a great question. It feels like we're sort of at that tipping point. We actually hear a lot from cyclists in the planning division, just because we do kind of oversee the implementation of Walk by Columbia. I think and when we did the Walk by Columbia plan, there was a lot of data out there about the number of people who are interested in cycling places but are just afraid because the facilities aren't there. And there's only a tiny percentage of people who are like, I'm gonna cycle everywhere no matter what, I'm not afraid. There's a pretty big percentage of people, especially when you get outside of, our downtown is a big geographic area. And when you think about all of the neighborhoods that are just outside of downtown, I mean, we just recently did a map. I mean, there's like 16,000, housing units within a pretty small radius. Those are too far to walk most of the time, to walk to get a cup of coffee or walk to the grocery store. But biking is really within a reasonable distance. You could bike a lot of places in 5 or 10 minutes. Most people don't want to bike if they don't feel safe. So there are a lot of people out there now that are pushing for more facilities, but until we really have that connectivity, there's going to be a lot of people who are hesitant. So we're starting to get there. I'm sure we're familiar with Calhoun Street got recently implemented. South Main is being worked on now, and that'll be a cycle track of those 4 blocks south of the State House. So it's been kind of slow and steady progress, but as soon as we start making some of those really critical connections, the Vista Greenway is partly built and being designed right now to go through part of North Columbia. So I think once we start to see more of that connectivity, a lot more people will feel like, confident and safe that they can actually do that. But it is a process.
Okay.
So that's a great question, though, because we do hear a lot from people. I think it's getting a little more momentum, the cycling community. And then finally, the last idea is really something that's happening as part of the plan anyway, which is streamlining the guidelines. That was really the impetus for going through this process, was try to create a more, succinct and set of guidelines that's very transparent, very clear, and also really focusing on the public realm and maybe a little bit less on overall building architecture, but how buildings really address the street and the sidewalk and, how people interact with buildings at street level. And so that was the final idea. I know I've done a lot of talking. Do you guys have any questions, or have y'all seen the website? Yeah? About what? Oh, yeah. Well, the schedule's a little bit, they're probably going to be closer, pardon me, to the end of October, maybe early November. We really, really wanted to have a draft of the guidelines before we came back to the stakeholders, because it's important that we have feedback on those. So that is probably going to be a little bit delayed from the original plan, which was September, probably end of October. But we'll certainly let you know about that and get those distributed when we have a draft that, we can put out there. So, but yeah, and then we also anticipate that this plan and the guidelines will, be coming to Planning Commission for recommendations, and then we'll be going to City Council after that for adoption.
So there's another roundtable session that anyone on planning commission can attend before we're actually.
We'll probably have to break it up so that y'all end up a quorum. But y'all, we actually were thinking we might do even a work session maybe before a planning commission meeting. That way we could advertise it and y'all could be together. We haven't really worked out the details, but yes, absolutely, we want to make sure that y'all are familiar with those and have a chance to provide feedback before it's finalized. So we'll definitely make that a priority.
I would just encourage everyone to, when this all started, the summer was hectic, but to go to any opportunity.
Thank you. Yeah, and feel free to call us at any time if you, get on the website and have other questions, and if we can't answer them, we'll certainly get answers for you. And then the only other thing I have on other business, I have to call a couple y'all out because it's September and we know training is due by the end of December. Harris, I think you have you have an hour and a half. Ryan, you need 3 hours of training before the end of the year. Yeah, so we're gonna have to start getting mean. Because the truth is, we have to send that information to the state of South Carolina and it's required training. So if we don't have all that proof that you went, then they'll take you off. So I don't know what the next opportunity is, but y'all know that Lee and Madeline are great about sending out those training opportunities. So please keep your eyes peeled and jump on the next ones that come up so that you can stay on Planning Commission. That doesn't count. As much fun as that would be, we have to get them approved by the state. So does anybody else have any other business they want to share? Nope. Okay. Oh, I'm glad you said that. Oh, yeah. Sorry, thank you.
I would put out, I'm gonna probably jinx myself by saying this, but I appreciate everything y'all done the last few sessions. It feels like people are prepared. Seems like there's a lot of good things going on, a lot of positivity, and it seems like the meetings are more effective.
Well, great, thank you. And thank you for I did mean to introduce Madeline, because I think this is Madeline's first Planning Commission meeting. Madeline Bowden is our new Land Use Board Coordinator. You've all gotten emails from her already. She was here in August, but since we canceled the meeting, we didn't get to formally introduce her, so. And then Lily Cumney is here. She is gonna be a new commissioner sitting up here next month, but she's at her observation meeting. So wanted to meet y'all as well, so thanks for reminding me about that. But, so can you believe it? We're gonna have a full board of 9. So we're super excited. We're gonna have to get another chair. Thank you all. I guess you need to, let's see, officially adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.